How many of you are card players? Anybody card players in here ever play cards? A little bit? Okay. Does anybody, you know what a trump is?
Yes.
What's a trump?
It's a card that beats all the other cards.
A card that beats all the other cards. Exactly right. So today's sermon is entitled, The Gospel Trumps the News.
I hear you.
Okay, and why, what I want you to kind of think about is Jesus presenting you the gospel. And I'd like for you to come, as it were, and sit alongside of Jesus for a moment. Just sit and listen to what he has to say about the gospel as it was presented not only by Jesus, but also presented by the Apostle Paul, and how the gospel is going to affect your life. Now, let me ask you this question. Does the news that you hear on a daily basis, depending on how daily you are in your news, or that you read, or however you get the news, because nowadays we're capable of getting the news all times from all parts of the world. It can come in forms of our iPad, or not that I have an iPad, iPhone, your radio, whatever it might be, your television, the news. You're getting news all the time. So the question to us is, how is that impacting your life? And how much effect is it having on your life? And what kind of priority do we put on the news as far as our lives are concerned? Now, when we think about the word gospel, the gospel simply means good news. And Jesus brought us good news. Jesus said, here is the good news. Here is the gospel. Here is where our focus needs to be. However, I realize and understand that in our world, all of our worlds, and different things impact us differently, because what may be good news to one person can be very, very bad news to someone else. Some news that might bring us hope may bring despair to other individuals and the like. But I want to take a look here in the book of Philippians of the Apostle Paul, in chapter 1 of the book of Philippians, verses 27 through 30. 3 short little verses here, Paul writing to the church, and he's reminding them of the gospel and its impact on their lives. So he tells the church here, whatever happens, verse 27, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. No matter what happens, conduct yourself in a manner that is worthy of the gospel of Christ. Now, news, how does it affect our conduct? And does our conduct reflect the gospel of Jesus Christ? If we have bad financial news, how does it affect the gospel, the good news? If we're kind of tight, does it affect the way in which we live our lives? How, our generosity or lack of generosity, do we get uptight? Do we get really concerned? Do we get irritable? Does our attitude change because of financial news? Or does our attitude change, for example, even in terms of health news? We get bad news. Is the bad news the overriding issue in our life? Does bad news take precedent over the good news of Jesus Christ? That's kind of what we're looking at. And the Apostle Paul is saying, look, whatever happens, conduct yourself in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. And so when we're talking about this today, it isn't just about news, but it is about our conduct. It is about our ability to trust God, to have faith in God, to be able to see beyond the news that can become so predominant in our life and fail to realize that there is a gospel out there. Then whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in one spirit, contending as one man for the faith of the gospel. So I'm going to finish reading this, and then we're going to look at some things. Without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. And in the King James Version, it uses the word adversity. When things are going wrong. Now, let me ask you the question. Do any of you think anything is going wrong in our world today? Well, maybe put it another way. Do you think a whole lot of stuff is going right? Well, according to the gospel, in a way, we can look at there's a lot of things that are going right because we have a firm belief that God has things in control, that God knows what He is doing, even though things are very bad in the news and can get a whole lot worse. But we all know how the news can affect us. The economy begins to pick up. It's amazing how our attitudes can begin to change. We hear news that you have a 4-bedroom house, and amazing how things change. Does it affect the gospel? Was the gospel, the good news, effective? People have difficulties, though, maybe not having a house. Does it affect the gospel in our life, our conduct? Then he goes, without being frightened in any way, those oppose you, this is a sign to them that will be destroyed, but that you will be saved, and that by God. For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ, not only to believe on Him, but also to suffer for Him, since you are going through the same struggle you saw I had and now hear that I still have. So, as Christians, do we live a life that becomes, that's the question, that becomes the gospel of Christ, that is reflective and worthy of the gospel? Again, as I've mentioned, the good news. Now, let's look at some key features of the gospel, as Jesus gives us key features of the good news. So what is good news? What is the gospel to Jesus? Well, let's look over here in Luke chapter 4. In Luke chapter 4, and we've read this scripture. I know you're all very familiar with it, but we have to be reminded. Do we hear the same news over and over again in our world? I think yesterday my wife had PBS on, and so it was early in the afternoon, and they were talking about what was going on in Afghanistan. Well, at 6 o'clock, they had the same news again. It was a repeat. So news keeps coming at us in that regard. But in Luke chapter 4, we'll begin here in verse 16, we find Jesus reminding and telling us of this here in verse 16, where He says to us, He went to Nazareth, where He had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day He went into the synagogue, and as was His custom, He stood up to read the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, and handed it to Him, unrolling it, and He found a place where it is written. Now, Jesus could have found a lot of places in the book of Isaiah, things that would be encouraging and also things that would be discouraging and the like. But this is what He reads to them from Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because He has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. Now, the gospel is good news to the poor. Oh my. Is it bad news to the rich? That's the opposite. If it's good news to the poor, is it bad news to the rich? Well, it could be bad news if you're the rich and you think that He's going to say, well, look, the good news is I'm going to call you to be a follower of mine. Follow me. Give up all that you have right here and come and follow me. Oh my. Good news with bad news. Oh, Lord, why can't I just follow you and keep everything I got? Because I want to keep everything I got. I've worked hard for this. I don't want to give this up. And failing to realize the opportunity in the good news that Jesus was presenting to the rich young ruler. Now, am I saying that being rich is wrong? I'm not saying that. Jesus said that the gospel is good news to the poor.
Feeling the blues today, or tired of life already? Do you have questions about life, or need spiritual advice? We can help. Log on to worldwidechurchofgod.com or wcgfairfield.blogspot.com and stay connected to reality. The Worldwide Church of God in Fairfield, Santa Rosa, and Modesto are located in the San Francisco Bay Area, regarded as the most prosperous region in the United States. We believe Jesus Christ when he proclaimed in Matthew 6:24 that serving God is more important than serving mammon. We welcome everyone to come and worship and fellowship every Saturday at the times listed on your screen and on our website, worldwidechurchofgod.com.